No warning, no leaks, no polite royal distancing. Just minutes ago, a legal move detonated inside palace walls that even senior aides never believed would happen. Princess Anne, long known as the family's enforcer, not its rebel, has crossed a line no royal has dared cross in modern history. Papers filed, names named. And at the center of it all, Camilla. Not whispers, not tradition, but charges, serious ones. And the clock is already ticking. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The shock did not come from rumors circulating in the press or carefully planted leaks from unnamed sources. It came from the silence that followed. Phones rang and went unanswered. Advisors froze mid-sentence. Because when the filing landed, it carried none of the familiar royal language meant to soften impact or preserve dignity. It was precise, cold, legal, and that alone told insiders everything they needed to know. This was not a symbolic protest. This was not internal pressure. This was a formal action designed to move forward whether anyone approved or not. Princess Anne has always been understood as the monarchy's immovable object, the one figure who never chased affection, never courted popularity, and never acted without purpose. That reputation is exactly why this moment sent a wave of panic through royal legal circles. When Anne speaks, people listen. When she acts, institutions shift. And when she chooses the law over loyalty, it signals that something fundamental has already broken beyond repair. Within minutes, aides reportedly realized the filing was structured in a way that made quiet resolution nearly impossible. Camilla's name was not implied. It was stated, not buried in footnotes, not obscured by ambiguity. It appeared clearly, directly, and repeatedly, removing any plausible deniability that this was a misunderstanding or procedural error. This was not a family disagreement disguised as legal language. It was a legal confrontation disguised as restraint. What made the situation even more volatile was how unprepared the palace appeared to be. There were no pre-written responses, no coordinated statements, no reassuring calls to calm nerves. Instead, there was a scramble, lawyers consulting lawyers, advisors reviewing documents they had never seen before, and senior figures quietly asking the same unspoken question. How long has Anne been preparing this? Because preparation was evident everywhere. In the timing, in the wording, in the deliberate absence of emotional language. This filing was designed to withstand pressure, delay, and backlash. And that suggested something far more alarming than a sudden act of defiance. It suggested patience, calculation, and resolve. As the reality settled in, one thing became painfully clear. This was no longer about protecting the institution at all costs. This was about drawing a line that could not be erased once crossed. A line that separated tradition from accountability, silence from consequence, loyalty from law. And with that line now firmly drawn, the palace was left reeling not just from what had happened, but from the realization that this moment did not begin today. But to understand why Princess Anne would take such an irreversible step, we have to go back long before the lawsuit into the simmering tensions no one outside the palace was meant to see. Princess Anne did not act impulsively. That's what makes this so dangerous. For years she watched, documented, and endured, choosing restraint over reaction. But behind closed doors, something was building. Conversations cut short, decisions made without her consent, lines crossed, then erased, until one moment tipped the balance. Not loud, not public, but final. And once that moment passed, there was no going back. For decades, Anne occupied a singular position within the monarchy, not the most celebrated, not the most visible, but the one trusted to hold the line when others faltered. She was the constant presence in rooms where decisions carried consequences, the figure who understood duty not as performance, but as responsibility. That role came with a cost. She absorbed disagreements quietly, accepted compromises she didn't believe in, and carried the burden of institutional stability while others moved freely above it. There were moments when she spoke up, not dramatically, not publicly, just enough to signal concern. Those objections were brushed aside with assurances that problems would be handled internally, that discretion was preferable to disruption. Each time, Anne stepped back not because she agreed, but because she believed the system would correct itself. That belief kept her silent longer than many expected, longer than was healthy. But patterns began to form. Decisions were made without consultation. Protocols shifted without explanation. Boundaries that had once been firm became negotiable, then invisible. Senior staff noticed. Whispers circulated about unease in meetings, about Anne leaving rooms earlier than usual, about her notes becoming longer, more detailed, more precise. This was not frustration. It was documentation. What unsettled those closest to her wasn't anger, but patience. Anne did not confront. She observed. She waited. She issued internal warnings that were careful, measured, impossible to dismiss as emotional. Each warning was acknowledged and quietly sidelined. The message was subtle but clear: endure a little longer. Trust the process. Don't escalate. So she did what she had always done. She endured. She believed that preserving unity mattered more than winning arguments. That belief, however, began to fracture under the weight of repetition. The same assurances, the same dismissals, the same expectation that she would absorb the consequences while others remained untouched. Then came the moment that changed everything. It did not explode into public view. There was no raised voice, no dramatic confrontation. Just a realization sharp and unmistakable that a line had been crossed in a way that could not be undone. A decision finalized without her knowledge. A principle compromised beyond repair. In that instant, Anne understood something she had refused to accept before. Silence was no longer neutral. It was permission. That was when restraint ended. Not in anger, but in clarity. She did not reach for influence or appeal to loyalty. She reached for something far more permanent. Something that could not be softened by tradition or smoothed over by time. And when that final incident occurred, Anne didn't confront Camilla emotionally. She did something far colder, far more calculated. These are not ceremonial complaints. They are structured, deliberate, and devastating. The charges Princess Anne has brought forward are the kind that don't disappear with apologies or press statements. Each allegation is layered. Each one points to intent, and together, they form a picture the palace never wanted the public to imagine, let alone see filed in legal form. What immediately unsettled legal observers was the precision. This was not a document padded with emotional language or vague grievances. It read like a roadmap, carefully assembled to leave no room for misinterpretation. Every paragraph carried weight. Every claim was anchored to a specific action, a specific decision, a specific moment when boundaries were crossed and recorded. These were not symbolic accusations meant to send a message. They were operational, designed to move forward whether anyone approved or not. The seriousness of the charges lies in their framing. They do not challenge tradition. They challenge conduct. They do not argue intent as a matter of perception, but as a pattern that can be traced, repeated, and demonstrated. That distinction matters. Because once conduct becomes the focus, the protections of royal ambiguity begin to erode. Titles no longer soften impact. Status no longer delays consequence. The language strips away ceremony and replaces it with accountability. What makes these charges especially dangerous is that they are personal, not to the monarchy in the abstract, but to Camilla herself. The filing does not hide behind collective responsibility or institutional failure. It isolates decisions, attributes authority, and connects outcomes directly to influence. In doing so, it removes the safety of distance. This is not about what the system allowed. It is about who acted within it. Legal experts quietly noted another detail that raised alarms. The strategy suggests time. Months, possibly longer. The structure implies consultation, review, and refinement. This was not drafted in reaction to a single incident. It was built gradually, strengthened by accumulation. That realization sent a chill through royal legal circles, because preparation of this scale means alternatives were considered and rejected. Withdrawal, under these conditions, is no longer a viable option. The moment the filing became formal, it triggered processes that cannot simply be reversed without consequence. Retreat would not restore calm, it would invite scrutiny. Silence would not protect anyone. it would amplify suspicion. Anne appears to have understood this from the beginning. The design of the charges leaves no graceful exit, only forward motion. For Camilla, this creates an unprecedented dilemma. Every response risks escalation. Every denial invites examination. And every attempt to minimize the issue clashes with the severity of the language used against her. The charges do not shout. They don't need to. Their strength lies in how quietly they dismantle assumptions of immunity. Inside the palace, the fear is not only about what the charges allege, but about what they open the door to. Because once legal clarity replaces royal discretion, the conversation changes. Questions multiply. Documents surface. And narratives that were once controlled begin to fracture. But the real shock isn't just what's written, it's who Anne believes enabled it to happen. This lawsuit doesn't exist in isolation. It points outward toward corridors of power that stayed silent when intervention was possible. According to insiders, Anne's filing quietly implicates more than one royal office. Not as defendants, but as witnesses who looked away. And that may be what truly terrifies the institution. Because beneath the surface of the legal language lies a far more unsettling implication, this situation was not unknown. Warnings were raised. Concerns were voiced. Signals were sent upward through channels designed specifically to prevent crises like this. Yet each time, those signals seemed to vanish into a system built to absorb discomfort and release nothing in return. The issue was not ignorance. It was inaction. Senior officials, according to those familiar with internal discussions, were alerted more than once that tensions were escalating beyond personal disagreement. Complaints were logged, then softened. Language was adjusted. Urgency was replaced with patience. What could not be dismissed outright was slowly diluted, reframed as manageable, containable, and above all private. That word became a shield. And behind it, responsibility quietly retreated. Legal advisors played a crucial role in that retreat. Rather than pushing for resolution, they reportedly advised caution, emphasizing the risks of exposure over the risks of delay. Containment became the guiding principle. Not correction. Not accountability. Just containment. The belief was simple. If the issue stayed inside the palace, it could be controlled. If it went public, it could not. What they failed to consider was what happens when containment becomes complicity. This is where Anne's decision becomes even more significant. She did not bypass internal resolution because she was impatient. She bypassed it because she believed it had already failed. The channels designed to protect the institution had instead protected themselves. Silence was rewarded, persistence was discouraged, and the cost of escalation was always placed on the one raising concerns, never on those ignoring them. Now those same offices are reportedly revisiting old files with fresh eyes. Documents once deemed settled are being reopened. Memos previously categorized as routine are suddenly under scrutiny, not because the truth has changed, but because the risk has. Anne's legal action has forced a reckoning that no internal review ever could. The paper trail exists, and it is no longer theoretical. What frightens the institution most is not a single outcome, but the precedent. If a senior royal can bypass the system and seek accountability through legal means, the entire architecture of quiet resolution begins to collapse. Others may follow. Other grievances may surface. And the unwritten rule of silence, the one that has preserved stability for generations, loses its power. This is no longer just about what happened. It's about who allowed it to continue. Who chose comfort over confrontation? Who believed delay was safer than action? Because once those questions are asked openly, there is no returning to the old order. And as the palace scrambles behind the scenes, Camilla herself is being forced into a position she never expected to face. Those close to Camilla describe the moment the news reached her as unreal. Not anger shock, not fury calculation. Because this wasn't media noise she could wait out. This was Anne. Legal. Unyielding. And as the implications sank in, Camilla had to decide quickly. Fight, negotiate, or retreat. Each option carried consequences. None offered safety. Inside her inner circle, the atmosphere shifted instantly from confidence to containment. Conversations became clipped. Assurances evaporated. The first instinct was disbelief, not that a challenge had emerged, but that it had arrived with such precision and force. Anne's reputation alone stripped away the usual reflex to dismiss, delay, or deflect. This was not a threat meant to posture. It was an action meant to land. And it did. Denial, once a reliable shield, suddenly felt fragile. The language of the filing made it clear that contradiction would invite scrutiny rather than close ranks. Each word appeared chosen to withstand rebuttal, to anticipate evasions before they were spoken. The more Camilla's advisors read, the more they understood the danger of responding too quickly or too softly. Silence risked appearing guilty. Resistance risked escalation. And every hour without a strategy amplified both. Legal advisors were mobilized with unusual urgency. Not for show, but for survival. Meetings multiplied. Scenarios were sketched, then abandoned. The question wasn't how to win it, was how to limit damage without provoking Anne further. Because this wasn't a typical confrontation. It wasn't rooted in perception or personality. It was grounded in process, documentation, and resolve. And that made it profoundly unpredictable. Attempts were made to frame the situation as an internal conflict, a misunderstanding elevated beyond necessity. That narrative, however, struggled to gain traction. Anne's involvement changed the emotional math. Public sympathy does not flow easily to spectacle, but it gravitates toward principle. Anne has long embodied restraint, discipline, and duty. The idea that she would act without cause felt implausible to many, and that perception began to harden before any official statement could soften it. Every potential response carried risk. A defensive posture could be read as confirmation. A conciliatory tone could be interpreted as admission. Even the language chosen to describe the dispute threatened to become evidence itself. Camilla's team understood that once Anne set the tempo, reacting became a liability. The challenge was not just to answer, but to avoid answering in a way that moved the story forward. What haunted the room most was the sense that this was no longer controllable. The usual levers, timing, messaging, distraction, felt ineffective against an opponent who had already committed to exposure. Anne had removed the option of waiting it out. She had replaced uncertainty with momentum. And momentum, once established, rarely favors those scrambling to catch up. As the pressure mounted, one truth became unavoidable. The danger was no longer confined to the charges themselves. It lay in the ripples they would create, in the reactions they would force, in the alliances they would reveal. Because this moment demanded more than a response, it demanded a stance. But the most dangerous variable in this unfolding battle isn't Camilla or Anne, it's how the rest of the royal family responds. This legal action has done what decades of scandal could not. It has forced the royal family to choose sides, quietly, carefully, but unmistakably. Support is being signaled in glances, in absences, in who makes phone calls and who doesn't. And every decision is being watched by Anne's legal team. In the days following the filing, subtle shifts began to surface. Invitations went unanswered. Previously routine check-ins fell silent. Names that once appeared together no longer did. These were not coincidences. They were calculations. Early signs of alignment emerged not through declarations, but through proximity. Who stood closer, who kept their distance, who suddenly found reasons to be unavailable. In a family trained to communicate without words, the message was clear enough. Some royals reportedly chose distance as a form of self-preservation. Not opposition, not support. Distance. They understood the danger of being seen on the wrong side of a legal line that could harden at any moment. Others, however, leaned in, quietly offering reassurance, sharing context, testing where Anne stood and how far she was willing to go. Each interaction carried weight because it could later be interpreted as intent. For those who tried to remain neutral, the pressure intensified. Neutrality, once a refuge, became a liability. Silence was no longer empty, it was conspicuous. Advisors warned that indecision could be read as avoidance, and avoidance could invite scrutiny. Calls came with careful phrasing. Meetings were requested without agendas. Everyone seemed to be asking the same question without saying it aloud. Where do you stand when the consequences arrive? The threat to long-term unity became impossible to ignore. This wasn't a disagreement that could be resolved with time or tradition. It was a fracture that ran along fault lines already under stress. Old grievances resurfaced. Unspoken resentments found new relevance. The idea of a shared front so carefully maintained began to crack under the weight of competing loyalties and fears. Perhaps most unsettling was the whispered possibility of testimony from within the family itself, not out of malice, but necessity. The knowledge that private conversations could become public record changed behavior instantly. Words were chosen with care, memories were quietly revisited, and trust already fragile was strained by the awareness that truth, once demanded by law, does not respect bloodlines. The emotional toll of this silence has been heavy. For some, restraint feels like betrayal. For others, support feels like exposure. And for those caught in between, the strain of watching without intervening has begun to show. Faces remain composed. Smiles appear on cue. But beneath that discipline lies exhaustion, fear, and the creeping sense that whatever happens next will change relationships permanently. Because once sides are chosen even quietly, they are rarely forgotten. And once the family divides along legal lines, reconciliation becomes more complicated than any public scandal ever was. And as those divisions deepen, the monarchy itself begins to feel the strain. This isn't just about two women. It's about whether the monarchy can survive a legal confrontation between its own senior figures. Because if Anne's case proceeds, it opens doors that have been locked for generations. And once opened, they may never close again. At the heart of the unease is precedent. This case threatens to redraw the invisible boundaries that have long protected the institution from itself. For centuries, disputes were absorbed by hierarchy, resolved through discretion or buried beneath ceremony. Law existed at the edges, never at the center. But Anne's action pulls it inward, forcing a reckoning with a question the monarchy has avoided at all costs: what happens when internal authority is challenged by external accountability? The risk to the monarchy's image of unity is immediate and profound. Unity has always been its armor, the illusion that difference dissolves beneath duty. This case fractures that illusion. It suggests that consensus can fail, that loyalty can have limits, and that senior figures are not immune to scrutiny simply because the institution depends on their silence. Once that idea takes hold, it becomes difficult to contain. Transparency, once optional, now feels unavoidable. The legal process does not honor tradition. It demands clarity. It asks for timelines, communications, decisions. It replaces inference with evidence. And that shift terrifies those who understand how much of the monarchy's stability relies on ambiguity. When the language becomes precise, narratives unravel. What was once protected by vagueness becomes exposed by detail. Constitutional advisors have reportedly expressed quiet alarm, not because they doubt the system's resilience, but because they recognize its fragility. The monarchy survives by balancing visibility with mystery, authority with distance. A legal confrontation collapses that balance. It invites questions from outside bodies, from institutions that do not answer to tradition but to statute. Oversight, once theoretical, becomes plausible. The threat of external involvement looms large. Courts do not defer to symbolism. Regulators do not negotiate with heritage. Once a process begins, it follows its own logic. And that logic does not stop at comfort or convenience. It presses forward, regardless of consequence. For an institution built on continuity, that forward motion feels existential. What haunts the palace most is the possibility of irreversible damage not through scandal, but through exposure. Scandals fade, records endure. If lines are crossed in public view, if authority is redistributed by necessity rather than design, the monarchy may emerge altered in ways it cannot fully control. Survival would no longer mean preservation. It would mean adaptation under pressure. And yet, amid this foreboding, Anne's intent remains clear. She has not framed this as rebellion or revenge. She has not sought applause or disruption. Her language, her posture, her resolve all point to a single conviction: that institutions endure only when they confront their failures honestly. And yet, even now, Princess Anne has made it clear this isn't about destruction, it's about accountability. Those who know Princess Anne say she has never cared about popularity, only principle. And this case, according to those close to her, is not fueled by revenge but by something she believes the monarchy has lost. Her refusal to settle quietly sends one unmistakable message: this ends now, or it ends everything. Anne's personal code has always been rigid, almost unforgiving in its clarity. Duty is not something she performs, it is something she lives by, even when it costs her comfort, affection, or approval. That code has guided her decisions for decades, shaping a reputation built not on charm, but on consistency. When others adapted to survive, Anne endured to preserve standards she believed were non-negotiable. And that is precisely why compromise, in this moment, feels impossible to her. To bend now would not be strategic, it would be a betrayal of everything she has upheld. Those closest to her say the emotional weight behind this decision is heavier than she ever allowed herself to acknowledge publicly. This was not an easy line to cross. It required accepting that the institution she has spent her life protecting may no longer be protected by silence alone. There is grief in that realization. Grief for what was promised. Grief for what was lost quietly, piece by piece, while restraint was mistaken for consent. Yet there is also resolve. Anne understands that settling quietly would signal that principle is negotiable, that accountability is optional, when discomfort outweighs consequence. For her, that would mark a point of no return not just personally, but institutionally. If the monarchy cannot withstand internal accountability, then its authority becomes performative rather than moral. That belief has hardened into purpose. This moment is already redefining her legacy. No longer simply the steadfast presence in the background, Anne is now positioned as a figure willing to confront the very structure she helped sustain. Not to dismantle it, but to force it to reckon with itself. History may debate her methods, but it will not misunderstand her intent. She is not seeking to be remembered kindly. She is seeking to be remembered truthfully. Quiet support has begun to surface in unexpected places. Not loud endorsements, not public alignment, but messages sent privately. Gestures of respect, subtle affirmations from those who have long shared her unease but lacked her resolve. That support matters not because it strengthens her position, but because it confirms she is not alone in believing something fundamental is at risk. What Anne believes is at stake if she stops is nothing less than credibility. The idea that duty still means something beyond appearance. That tradition must answer to principle, not the other way around. To step back now would be to accept that the cost of truth is too high, and that for her is unacceptable. She has chosen endurance over ease, consequence over comfort, and in doing so, she has made it clear that whatever happens next, she will not retreat into silence. But as this legal storm intensifies, one final question remains unanswered. The lawsuit has been filed, the charges stand, and the palace is running out of time. Behind sealed doors, strategies are collapsing. Because if this proceeds to its next phase, names will surface, testimonies will follow, and reputations may not survive. The question isn't whether this changes the monarchy. It's who will still be standing when it does. What comes next is no longer abstract. Legal milestones are already looming, each one narrowing the space for maneuver. Deadlines that cannot be delayed. Requests that cannot be ignored. Decisions that will demand answers rather than deflection. The quiet hope that this might stall, fade, or be redirected has evaporated. Momentum has taken hold, and momentum favors exposure over comfort. The possibility of public proceedings now hangs over the institution like a gathering storm. Once processes move beyond private chambers, control shifts. Language becomes formal. Records become visible. Statements are weighed not for loyalty but for accuracy. For an institution accustomed to managing perception, this is unfamiliar territory. And it is unforgiving. Because public scrutiny does not pause for tradition. With that scrutiny comes risk, and not everyone bears it equally. Some figures stand closer to the center of the storm than others, whether by action or association. Those who once believed distance would shield them are beginning to realize how narrow that margin has become. In a legal chain, proximity matters. Silence can be interpreted. Absence can be questioned. And the greatest risk may fall on those who assume they would never be asked to explain themselves. This moment has the potential to permanently alter royal power dynamics. Authority that once flowed through custom may soon flow through accountability. Influence that depended on discretion may be tested by transparency. and the hierarchy that relied on unity could find itself reshaped by consequence. What emerges on the other side may still be a monarchy, but not the one that existed before this began. Silence, once a reliable form of protection, is losing its power. The instinct to wait, to endure, to say nothing until the storm passes, now carries its own danger. Because silence can be filled by others, by documents, by testimony, by narratives formed without permission. The longer the quiet lasts, the louder the questions become. There is a growing sense, even among those who have weathered decades of upheaval, that this is only the beginning. Not the end of a dispute, but the opening of a chapter that cannot be rewritten. What started as a single legal action has become a reckoning one that forces the institution to confront not just what happened, but what it allowed. The palace may still hope for resolution, for containment, for a return to familiar ground, but the ground has shifted, and with every step forward the past moves closer to the surface. Because in the monarchy, some battles are whispered, but this one is being fought in the open, and there may be no way to stop it now. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.